I never thought the worst words I would ever hear would come from my own mother, spoken not in private where they might sting less, but in front of every relative gathered around the Christmas table. She said she was ashamed of me, and then she laughed as if it were the funniest holiday joke. The sound of her laugh, sharp and rehearsed, still echoes in my chest like the ringing of a cracked bell, and I remember staring at the twinkling lights on the tree, pretending to admire the ornaments just so I would not have to meet the eyes of the cousins who were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. If you have ever had someone you love tear you down just to polish their own image, you will understand why this moment shaped the rest of my life. And if you're listening now, your support means the world to me. Leaving a like or a comment is not just a click. It's a reminder that stories like mine matter, and that women who've been silenced can finally be heard. My name is Grace, I am 26 years old, and this is the story of the last Christmas I allowed my mother to humiliate me. The evening had begun with the usual fanfare that my mother Sylvia adored, every detail of her home curated like a holiday catalog spread. The driveway glowed with white icicle lights wrapped around every post. The entryway was perfumed with cinnamon sticks staged in bowls, and the dining table was set with matching red chargers, crystal glasses, and embroidered napkins that she reminded everyone had taken her weeks to stitch. She lived for these details, for the compliments that rolled in from uncles, aunts, and neighbors who said the dinner looked like something from a magazine. I had grown used to being one of those details, though I was the one she didn't polish, but rather displayed as an example of what not to do. She would compare me to my older brother, to my cousins, to anyone really, so long as it allowed her to slip in a little barb wrapped in a smile. When she said she was ashamed of me, it wasn't a slip of the tongue or an outburst of frustration. It was deliberate. She had built to that line as carefully as she built her centerpieces, weaving in small comments all evening about how some people never quite figure things out, or how real adults know how to balance responsibility. My relatives had smiled politely, shifting in their seats, chuckling softly to diffuse the tension, but when she finally delivered the big line, she laughed out loud, a sound that made it clear she thought she had turned my life into her punchline. I sat frozen, my fork in hand, my cheeks burning, and I told myself what I always did, that if I just stayed quiet, the moment would pass and the evening would move on. But in that silence, I also felt something new. A weight that had been pressing on me for years finally began to tremble, as if it was preparing to shift. Because what no one knew, what I had carried like a stone in my chest for years, was that I held a truth about my family, one that I had kept hidden out of loyalty, out of fear, out of a twisted hope that protecting my mother might protect me too. And every word she spoke that night, every laugh at my expense, scraped against that stone until I could no longer contain it. I remembered nights lying awake, wondering what would happen if I told the truth. Would the family believe me, or would they think I was bitter? Would it destroy what little peace we had left? Or would it finally bring justice for what she had done? I had rehearsed the what-ifs in my mind 1,000 times, and every time I convinced myself to stay silent. But sitting there at that Christmas table, listening to her laugh while her friends and relatives looked away, I realized silence had only ever protected her, never me. The injustice of it all was that she managed to humiliate me while presenting herself as the perfect matriarch, the generous hostess, the woman who sacrificed everything for her family. She played that role so convincingly that many believed it, even as they winced at the cruelty of her jokes. I wanted to scream that her perfection was a mask, that beneath the wreaths and the pies and the forced laughter was a woman who had hidden something far uglier than my supposed failures. I had tolerated her digs because I thought revealing the truth would be worse than enduring them, but in that moment, watching her sip her wine and beam at her own cleverness, I felt a shift inside me. The mask she wore was cracking, and I knew that one day, very soon, it would shatter. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I could no longer bear to live in her shadow. That night at the table was the beginning of the end of her reign over me, though no one else could see it yet. To them, I was the quiet daughter once again absorbing the sting of her mother's words, while Sylvia laughed and clinked her glass. But inside me, the balance was tipping. I knew that I could not keep the family's secret forever. And though I still kept it locked away that evening, though I still swallowed the words that trembled at the edge of my tongue, I realized something had shifted permanently. Her humiliation no longer silenced me. It fueled me. What she thought was her greatest victory over me would become the moment she handed me the strength I needed to finally stand up, reveal what I had carried all these years, and turn her laughter into tears. Christmas was not the first time my mother cut me down. It was simply the loudest. For as long as I can remember, she turned every gathering into a stage, polishing her words until they landed like blades hidden in sugar. At birthdays, church suppers, and family reunions, she always found a way to present me as the weak link. And while her tone was dressed as humor, her eyes told me she enjoyed the sting. She told people I had a good heart, but not much else, that my cooking was store-bought, that my achievements were luck, and each small dig became part of a long routine where I was cast as the example of how not to live. I laughed along sometimes, because the alternative was to sit in silence while the room joined her in pretending it was all harmless fun, but inside every remark carved another line of doubt across my confidence. Over time, I began to believe her version of me. I thought maybe she was right, maybe I was scatterbrained, maybe I was too ordinary, maybe I had chosen the wrong kind of life compared to my brother's perfect career and my cousin's polished marriages. I rented a small apartment, worked a job that paid bills but didn't make headlines, and surrounded myself with people who valued kindness more than status, but none of that earned her respect. For her, reputation was the only currency worth counting, and in her eyes, I was poor. She spoke with authority, and when relatives looked at me afterward, I could see her words reflected in their expressions, as though I was branded by her version of who I was. That quiet shame became the air I breathed, so constant that I almost forgot it was suffocating me. What made it worse was that she recruited others into her theater. My cousins chuckled nervously when she spoke. My aunts whispered that she went too far, but still smiled in her presence, and my father, who could have stopped it with a single word, sat silent, preferring peace to confrontation. Her control extended beyond words, too. She gave help like it was charity, but always demanded loyalty in return, reminding people of what they owed her. She clipped my wings under the guise of protection, urging me not to move away for school, not to spend my savings on a program, not to risk independence. Each choice I didn't make on my own became another invisible string tied back to her, and I convinced myself that staying obedient was safer than breaking free. By 26, I had lived entirely in her script, the foolish daughter who made others feel superior, the silent target who kept the peace at the cost of her dignity. Yet beneath that silence I carried a truth, one far heavier than her insults, a secret I had guarded for years because I thought revealing it would break the family apart. I told myself I was protecting everyone by swallowing it, but in reality I was only protecting her, and every time she laughed at me, every time she painted me small for the amusement of others, that secret pressed harder against the walls I built around it. By the time she said she was ashamed of me at Christmas, I understood something had shifted beyond repair. The performance had gone on long enough, and though no one knew it yet, the ending would not be written by her, but by me. It happened weeks before Christmas, on a grey afternoon when I went with Aunt Linda to help sort through boxes of things left behind in my grandmother's attic. The house smelled of cedar and dust, the kind of scent that carries both comfort and sorrow, and I remember pulling down a stack of ribbons, ornaments, and old tins filled with forgotten notes. One box was different, though, tied with faded red string, and inside were letters in my grandmother's familiar handwriting, some addressed directly to me. My hands trembled as I opened them, realizing these were messages I had never seen, words she had written with love and belief that had somehow never reached me. It was like hearing her voice again after years of silence, a voice that told me I was worth more than I had ever been allowed to feel. The letters spoke of her faith in my independence, of small funds she had put aside in my name so I could study, travel, or start a life on my own terms. There were receipts, bank slips, even her gentle reminders to believe in yourself when others do not. For a moment I couldn't breathe, because the reality of what I was holding was not just hope, it was proof. Proof that someone had seen my worth, proof that plans had been made for me, and proof that those plans had been hidden. It was not an oversight or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice, because these letters had been kept from me by someone who decided I did not deserve to know. I looked at Aunt Linda and saw the recognition in her eyes before she even spoke. She admitted she suspected something was wrong when my mother handled all the paperwork after Grandma passed, but she never had evidence until now. She told me to keep the letters safe, to make copies, to remember that the truth has its own way of surfacing when the time is right. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of power inside me, a small spark glowing against the weight of all the shame I had carried. If my mother's control was built on manipulation and silence, then what I held in my hands was the key that could unlock it. That night I lay awake with the box by my bed, reading every line until the words blurred with tears. I thought of all the nights I had endured her laughter, the years of being cast as the failure of the family, and I realized she had never been the keeper of truth, only the keeper of secrets. What if I could stop her? What if I could show everyone who she really was? What if I no longer had to shrink at her voice, because I finally had something stronger than her reputation, evidence, written in the hand of the woman who had always loved me? The spark of hope grew brighter with every what if, and though I was not yet ready to act, I knew that for the first time the power was not all hers. Once the shock of discovering those letters settled into something steadier, I knew silence was no longer an option, but I also knew rushing into confrontation would be reckless. My mother thrived on drama. She twisted raised voices into proof of disrespect, and she dismissed every challenge as childish rebellion. If I was going to stand against her, I needed to prepare carefully, to build my steps with the same precision she used to stage her holiday dinners. I gathered the letters into protective sleeves, scanned every page so there would always be a copy, and placed the originals in a folder I carried with me like a shield. Each detail became part of a strategy that was no longer about surviving humiliation, but about exposing the truth without giving her the chance to rewrite it. I spent evenings researching bank records and dates, connecting the dots my grandmother had left. Every line confirmed what I already suspected, that my mother had quietly taken control of funds meant for me, perhaps justifying it to herself as protecting me, but really keeping me dependent on her. I called the bank to confirm balances, and though the details were blurred by time, enough remained to show that my grandmother's instructions had not been followed. I felt my fear shifting into clarity, because evidence is a powerful anchor against gaslighting, and with each piece of proof I collected, her power over me shrank a little more. Aunt Linda, who had always been gentler in her presence than in her silence, promised she would stand by me if the moment came. She reminded me that the truth wasn't only mine to reveal, it was a family truth, and the weight of carrying it alone had already cost me years of confidence. Together we decided I would not confront my mother in secret, because secrets were her weapon, and the only way to take that weapon away was to bring the truth into the light. The Christmas dinner, with all the relatives present, was not just another stage for her performance. It was the perfect stage for mine. Only this time, instead of a cruel laugh, there would be facts that no one could deny. Still, I promised myself I would not scream, I would not argue, and I would not let anger write my words. She had humiliated me by turning me into a spectacle, But I would not win by humiliating her in the same way. My power would come from calmness, from showing evidence with a steady hand, from speaking with a voice she could not twist into hysteria. I even placed the top letter in a small gift bag with my grandmother's embroidered handkerchief, a quiet symbol that this was not vengeance, but restoration. It was my plan to choose dignity over destruction, and though I trembled at the thought, I knew the moment was coming when the performance would end and the truth would finally have its turn to stand. On Christmas evening, I entered my parents' glowing house with the folder in my bag and a calmness I had never felt before. Candles flickered in the windows, music drifted softly, and every surface shone with perfection. My mother moved through the rooms in her emerald dress, placing guests like chess pieces, her eyes sparkling with the promise of another performance. I greeted relatives with polite smiles, but I could already sense she was circling me, waiting for her chance to strike. Dinner opened with her proud commentary about the food, the centerpiece, the flawless details only she cared about, and soon her words turned toward me. She spoke of people who never quite settle, who live paycheck to paycheck, who have not found a respectable place in life. Each sentence was punctuated with a glance in my direction, just long enough for everyone to catch it. I passed dishes, smiled faintly, and kept my silence, though the familiar burn rose in my chest. As the night went on, the digs sharpened. She told a story about my past mistake with a bill, exaggerated until it sounded comical, and added that I was still finding myself. A few cousins laughed, others looked down at their plates, but no one defended me. Normally, I would have shrunk into myself, but that night I simply breathed and remembered the weight of the letters and bank slips waiting in my bag. I no longer needed their laughter to pass. I had something stronger than silence. The air at the table grew thick, the sparkle of the tree almost mocking against the tension. My mother believed she was building to another victory, stacking each remark like kindling before the final match. What she didn't realize was that I was ready this time. For once, I wasn't just enduring her theater, I was waiting for her cue. And when she gave it, when she delivered the line she thought would break me, I would be the one to end the performance on my terms. It came as naturally to her as raising a glass. My mother leaned back in her chair, let the room fall quiet, and with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she announced that she and my father were ashamed of me. The words slid across the table like a knife, sharp enough to make my cousins stiffen and my aunts glance away. Before I could even breathe, she laughed, a crisp ringing sound that told everyone this humiliation was meant as entertainment. For years I had sat through these moments, convincing myself it was easier to let them pass. But this time, the laugh didn't make me smaller. It made me rise. The fork slipped from my hand onto the plate, the clink echoing louder than her laughter. My body felt steady, as though all the years of silence had been rehearsals for this single moment. I pushed back my chair and stood, not in anger but in calm resolve, and the shift was so unexpected that the entire table went still. For the first time in my life, she didn't have control of the room. I did. The sight of me standing tall where I had always sat in silence drew more attention than any cruel remark she could deliver. Her smile faltered, but only slightly, and she tried to laugh again as if to brush it off, yet the air had already changed. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My cousins watched wide-eyed, and Aunt Linda folded her hands together as though she had been waiting for this moment too. I did not raise my voice, did not rush, did not let anger spill into the space. I simply looked at my mother, the woman who had crafted every insult like a performance, and I let her see that I was no longer her audience. The silence stretched until it felt heavier than the chandelier above us, and in that silence I found strength. All the years of swallowing her words, all the nights of rehearsing what-ifs, all the secrets I had carried alone were now pressing at the surface. My mother thought she had ended me with her laugh, but she had no idea she had just given me the perfect opening. What she believed was her triumph would become the moment her mask cracked, because I was ready, and the truth was ready with me. I let the silence linger, then reached for the small gift bag beside my chair. My voice was steady when I said I had something meant for me but hidden all these years. Curiosity swept the table as I pulled out an envelope, the paper worn but intact, and explained it was my grandmother's letter from the Christmas I turned 18. My mother's smile tightened, her hands stiff on the table, as though she already knew what was about to surface. I read aloud my grandmother's words, lines filled with pride and belief in me, and her promise that she had set aside a fund to help me build my own future. Gasps rose when I read her clear instruction that no one had the right to withhold it. I placed the letter on the table for all to see, and in that instant the sparkle drained from my mother's face, leaving only a strained expression she could not disguise. I didn't need to accuse her directly. The truth sat between us in ink and paper. Aunt Linda confirmed the handwriting and the dates, her voice calm but firm, and the atmosphere shifted at once. The laughter that had always followed my mother's barbs was gone, replaced by silence that pressed down heavier than any words. Every eye turned toward her, waiting for an explanation she could no longer offer. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not the fear of losing control over me, but the fear that the image she had built for years was beginning to collapse. She realized this was not a passing remark I could be shamed into forgetting. It was the first crack in a mask she had worn too long. The power in the room was no longer hers, and everyone felt it. I kept my hands steady as I laid out more of what I had discovered. The letter was only the beginning. Alongside it were bank slips, showing deposits my grandmother had made specifically in my name, funds meant to help me step into adulthood with freedom. Those balances never reached me because my mother quietly redirected them, insisting years later that she was only protecting me from wasting money. In reality, she kept the control for herself, deciding when and how I was allowed to move forward. The truth was simple but devastating. My independence had been stolen not by circumstance but by choice. The room grew tighter as I explained how those letters had been tucked away, never delivered, and how every decision my grandmother tried to honor for me had been intercepted. Aunt Linda confirmed she had suspected something was wrong when documents vanished after the estate was settled. Now, with proof in front of us, it was undeniable. My mother had built her authority not only on sharp words, but also on secrets, keeping what wasn't hers and using silence as her shield. She opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but the words faltered. Everyone at the table knew what this meant. The proud matriarch who mocked me as irresponsible had actually stolen the very resources that might have proven her wrong. It wasn't just cruelty anymore, it was betrayal. For years, I had carried this knowledge alone, tolerating her barbs because I thought revealing it would destroy the family. But sitting there, I understood the family had already been living inside her lie. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation I could have spoken. My mother's face was drained of triumph, her laughter replaced by tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. The irony was cruel and perfect at once. The very thing she had used to keep me dependent became the truth that stripped her of control. For the first time, everyone saw her not as the perfect hostess, but as the woman who had betrayed her own daughter to preserve an image. And for the first time, I felt the weight of those hidden years lift from my shoulders. The letter and slips lay on the table like open wounds, and no one dared move. My cousins stared at me with wide eyes, my aunts whispered to each other, and even my father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, as if realizing his silence had cost him too much. My mother tried to steady herself, saying she only wanted what was best, that she had acted out of love, but the words rang hollow. For years she had painted me as careless and weak, yet here was proof that she had stolen the very chance to prove otherwise. Her laughter was gone, replaced by a desperate tremor in her voice that only deepened the weight of the truth. Aunt Linda leaned forward, her calm voice cutting through the tension. She suggested the only way to make this right was to restore the fund in full, to honor what my grandmother had intended. The relatives murmured in agreement, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother cornered not by me alone, but by the entire family. Her reputation, her most precious possession, was slipping through her fingers. Each second of silence from the people who once chuckled at her jokes was another piece of her power dissolving. I did not raise demands, I did not shout, I simply said I wanted boundaries and fairness. I wanted what was promised to me and an end to the public humiliations. It was not vengeance, it was justice, and the room knew it. The more calmly I spoke, the more small she seemed, her emerald dress now nothing but fabric draped on a woman stripped of authority. My cousins, who had always laughed nervously when she mocked me, nodded quietly, as though they too were tired of being part of her theater. The moment was both devastating and liberating. For years she had used shame as her weapon, but that night the shame belonged only to her. The family, once her audience, became my witnesses, and I realized I had not destroyed them by speaking. I had freed them from the lie. My mother lowered her gaze, her hands trembling, tears welling despite her attempt to hold them back. She had wanted to make me small, but instead she had exposed her own weakness. And in that reversal, the power that had always been hers finally became mine. In the heavy silence that followed, I finally felt what it meant to be free of her grip. I no longer carried myself like the child who shrank under every sharp word. I stood as a woman ready to shape her own future. I told the table I planned to use the restored fund to finish the certification I had put off, to secure the independence I had always been denied. My voice was steady, not defiant, but certain, and for the first time I was not asking for permission. I was declaring my life mine to claim. My cousins looked at me differently, not with pity, but with respect, as if they too recognized that the role I had been cast into was gone. I spoke of moving into a home that would be mine alone, not within walking distance of her constant supervision, but still close enough for family I chose to welcome. I even said I hoped to host a gathering myself one day, not with perfection, but with warmth, a place where laughter did not come at the expense of anyone's dignity. It was the kind of dream I had buried under her control, now finally allowed to breathe. A cousin broke the tension with a light-hearted joke about me finally having first pick of leftovers, and the table erupted in gentle laughter, this time warm, not cruel. That small sound carried more healing than any apology my mother could give. It reminded me that families can shift, that stories can be rewritten, and that even the smallest gesture of support can loosen the grip of years of silence. The atmosphere, once suffocating, began to feel lighter, as if the truth had let in air no one realized we were missing. Then my mother tried to speak, but what came out was not defense or anger. It was a choked sob. Tears slid down her cheeks, and the woman who had laughed at me moments earlier now sat undone before everyone. She muttered words about fear and wanting me safe, excuses that no longer carried weight, but the tears were real, unpolished, uncontrolled. For the first time, I believed she saw the cost of what she had done, not just to me, but to herself. The reversal was complete. I was no longer her target. I was the author of my own life, and she was the one left broken before the family she once ruled. The days after that dinner felt almost unreal, as if the air itself had shifted. My mother, once the center of every conversation, withdrew into silence, her calls fewer and shorter, her words stripped of the sharpness that had once defined them. A week later, I received the confirmation of the transfer, the fund fully restored to my name. No speeches, no explanations, only numbers on a screen, but to me it was more than money. It was the proof that her power was not absolute anymore. The chains she had wrapped around me for years had been loosened, and I no longer felt the need to justify my choices to anyone but myself. I did not seek revenge. I sought boundaries. I wrote my mother a letter of my own, not cruel, not triumphant, but firm. I told her if she wished to remain in my life, it would only be with respect, that I would not tolerate humiliation or manipulation again. There would be no more family dinners turned into stages, no more barbs disguised as jokes, no more secrets hidden in boxes. If she could not accept those terms, then distance would be safer for both of us. It was not an ultimatum born of anger, but of clarity. I finally understood that love without respect is not love at all. My cousins reached out in the weeks that followed, some apologizing for their silence at past gatherings, others simply telling me they were proud of me. I realized many of them had been caught in the same web, laughing out of habit, afraid to step out of line. My courage had given them permission to see her differently, and in some quiet way it had freed them too. The weight of being her sole target had lifted, replaced by a strange kind of solidarity I had never known before. For once, I was no longer alone in the truth. As for my mother, I saw her only once more that winter, and she was changed. The proud posture was gone, replaced by a woman who looked smaller, her voice softer, her eyes carrying the burden of tears that had not yet dried. She spoke of mistakes and fear, of wanting control because she thought it was care, but I no longer needed her explanations. I listened without giving back the power I had claimed. For the first time, I left her house without the heaviness I had always carried. I had not destroyed her. I had simply refused to be destroyed by her any longer. By the time the next Christmas came, my life felt lighter than it had in years. I was living in my own small apartment, one I had chosen without anyone's permission, and every corner of it reflected me, not someone else's expectations. The fund from my grandmother was being used the way she had intended, paying for the certification that would open new doors. My days were filled with quiet confidence instead of constant doubt, and I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed with my mother's name. The power she once held over me had faded, replaced by the calm assurance that I was steering my own life at last. When the season arrived, I hosted my first holiday gathering in that apartment. It was not grand or polished. The table was mismatched, the cookies were slightly uneven, and the tree leaned just a little to one side. But the room glowed with warmth, the kind of laughter that builds rather than breaks, and for the first time in memory, I felt what Christmas was meant to be. My cousins came. Aunt Linda brought her famous rolls, and even the awkward moments were softened by the new understanding we shared. It wasn't perfection. It was real, and it was mine. As I placed one of my grandmother's ornaments on the tree, the little glass bell etched with the word "believe," I realized the deepest truth of all. Believing in myself had been harder than believing in her love, but now both felt alive in me. My mother had not destroyed me, though she tried to make me small. Instead, she had handed me the strength to rise, and in the end, it was not revenge that mattered, but justice, not cruelty, but boundaries, not silence, but truth. The sweetest victory was not in watching her cry, but in choosing to live free of her control. The moral is simple: never confuse control with love, and never mistake silence for weakness. Families may try to hide their secrets, but the truth has a way of shining brighter than any string of Christmas lights. My mother once laughed at me to make herself look powerful, but the laughter ended, and the truth remains. I am no longer the girl she tried to shame. I am the woman who stood up, spoke out, and walked into a future that was finally mine. And every time the bell catches the light on my tree, I remember that even the deepest wounds can lead to the strongest kind of peace. If this story touched you, please hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support really means a lot and helps me keep sharing more stories like this.